Hi, my name is Laura.
And my name is Gage.
And today we're going to be presenting on Dana S. Dunn's novel, The Social Psychology of Disability, specifically looking at the chapter called Towards an Understanding of Disability Identity.
All right, so to begin with, it should come as no surprise to anyone who has studied psychology that identity is one of the most important components of psychology. And Wright, 1983, said that self-picture is an intricate one, consisting of a variety of particular characteristics that define for the person his or her identity, as well as a global self-evaluation of personal worth. Now, what this means, what identity is composed of is self-images built from connections to particular others, including groups. Identity is also composed of personal definitions of the self based on personality traits, roles, and social bonds, and they can be focused on the past, present, or future. Having a disability identity means holding favorable or beneficial beliefs about your own disability and positive relationships with other members of the disabled community. How well these identities are formed depends on the person's placement on the disability continuum. And in an ideal scenario, someone who is higher up on the disability continuum, self-perceived, is more likely to be more involved and feel more connected to the disabled community. And like all other identities, such as race and gender, disability identities come with both positives and negatives, and they follow a process of formation. The stages of positive identity formation are as follows. They are belongingness, which is feeling welcomed to this new community while at the same time acknowledging that you are still part of a larger social community. Coming home is coming more to peace with your identity as part of the disabled community. Coming together, which is synthesizing those identities, both the disabled identities and the other things that give you an identity. And coming out, which is private and public acknowledgement of your membership in the disabled community, while realizing that that does not detract from your own identity.
So going off of what Gage spoke about, narrative psychology, or narrative in general, is kind of a form of storytelling. So the narrative psychology is the study of how people tell the stories and what components that involves. So basically narrative identity then is how people attach meaning to their experiences. It can be useful in predicting future behavior. It can help navigate and negotiate various social worlds and aspects of one's social identity, and can inform personal identities for oneself and others, so how they navigate through those different spaces within society. And so furthermore, this is kind of the internal experience of external events, so it's how you make sense of the events in your daily life and how you incorporate that into your own identity and your own story. So it's kind of the subconscious and the conscious combining to create belief systems that help us make sense of our experiences in everyday life. So specifically related to disability, it ties the biography of the reality of being a person with a disability to the social experience of how they interact with people in daily life and the feedback that they receive and their lived experiences in society. So this can have a really big effect on shaping a person with disability's sense of self in a lot of ways, in conjunction with a multitude of many other factors of identity that inform one's sense of self. So some key themes that are brought up in this chapter about disability identity narratives are communal attachment, affirmation of disability, self-worth, pride, discrimination, and personal meaning. So it's also important to note that these factors are different from person to person. They vary incredibly on an individual basis. And so they vary a lot on factors of environment and the presence of a support system and other contextual factors. And also there are multiple themes that occur in a person's life, so it's not, one or the other. There are multiple themes, and some may weigh more heavily than others within a person's life. And it's also important to note the onset of disability and how much that can weigh into shaping a disability narrative, given that that kind of feeds into how strongly one associates with an in-group or out-group related to disability, given the time in their life when they became an in-group of disability in that group. So basically disability narratives can have a lot of implications for people both within and outside of disability. So they can really serve to educate others about the lived experiences of living with disability, keeping in mind that these vary from person to person on an individual basis, and there are no two of the same experiences with disability. But they can also be used a lot in rehabilitation practices and in therapy, in that therapists can share different disability narratives with their clients to help illustrate different kinds of coping and succumbing mechanisms, and can be really useful in providing reflection on one's own disability or lack of disability, however they choose to define that within the scope of their own lives. And also can be useful in acquiring and maintaining positive outlooks by having kind of examples of narratives to learn about and hear about from other people in a community. So the study also kind of delved into a certain study by Wang and DeVito. So they had a group of people with disability in a university setting, and they primed some of those people to think about their identities as students, and specifically to think about themselves and their life as a student, whereas they had another group thinking about their life and the aspect of their identity as a person with a disability. And so those who were student primed were found to have a lot more autonomous thoughts and fewer dependence thoughts compared to the group that was disability primed and thinking about their identity within that scope had fewer autonomous thoughts. So that just kind of shows how important it is to be conscious of how within society people interact with people with different aspects of identity, and how that can kind of lead to a certain sense of resilience to focus on other aspects of identity and to not have it be one overwhelming quality.
Hello again. Also found in this chapter is mentioned that there are ways that those associated with people with disabilities can aid in the development of positively oriented disability identities. As outlined in Wright 1983, there were principles relevant to this goal, 6 of which are of particular importance. Some of these Laura already touched on, but to begin with, Principle 6, active involvement of the client in rehabilitation process is necessary if they aren't actively engaged in trying to become more autonomous or gain a sense of self that doesn't depend on other people. Rehabilitation won't be too useful to a person who has newly become a part of a disability community. Principle 7, clients should not be treated in isolation as they are members of larger groups. So this just involves acknowledging that people need people. And if you treat a client like all alone, they're going to feel more like they're alone and that they have more dependence on other people, whereas if you treat them among a group of other disabled people, it will build their sense of community and allow them to see that they're not alone and that there's a lot of people going through what they're going through. Principle 8, personalities and circumstances of people with disabilities are unique, so it's important to recognize the need for flexibility. This is just something that's fundamental to people, just in general. Like, we're all different. We all have our own circumstances with our families, with our homes, with our significant others. Things are different from person to person, and it's important to acknowledge that when working with people with disabilities. Otherwise, treatment is less useful. And then principles 15 and 16, client involvement and ability to contribute to the life of the general community is fundamentally linked to daily life. So having them feel like they're still part of something bigger, reinforcing that even though they are disabled, they are still able to contribute to the world around them and the communities that they are a part of, is very important to making sure they preserve that autonomy and maintain a positive outlook on themselves and their disability. And then finally, Principle 20, invite people with disabilities to act as co-planners, co-evaluators, and consultants on disability and rehabilitation issues, seeing as how these are issues that concern them primarily and not just other people without disabilities. It seems reasonable to get their input on how those types of activities should be conducted. So they should have a say in how they're being treated and what would make them feel better about having a disability.
Okay, so thank you so much for watching. We just want to note that all the experiences of people with disability do vary from person to person, but we hope that this video provided a little bit of knowledge about narrative and the role of that within the scope of disability.
Yeah. Thank you very much.